Vacations are supposed to be an escape from the daily grind, a time to relax and unwind. That was our plan when we impulsively booked a trip to a secluded beachside resort. We envisioned sun-soaked days and peaceful nights, a perfect getaway from it all. The place was every bit as stunning as the brochures had promised. The beach was a stretch of golden sand, the ocean shimmering under the bright sun, and the air was filled with the scent of salt water. But as the sun began its descent, the atmosphere shifted. The vibrant colors of the sunset bled into something more unsettling, and a strange tension crept into the air. The shadows lengthened, and the once inviting breeze carried an unexpected chill. We checked into our hotel, a charming, rustic building nestled at the edge of a dense forest that bordered the beach. It was the perfect blend of comfort and seclusion, but there was something off about it. That first night, as we settled into our room, strange noises began to filter through the walls. They weren't the usual creaks of an old building or the rustling of leaves outside. Instead, they were distant, whispering voices, barely audible but persistent, as if they were just out of reach. My wife and I exchanged uneasy glances, but neither of us wanted to admit that something felt wrong. We chalked it up to the unfamiliar surroundings and tried to ignore it. The next day was bright and sunny, and the unease from the night before seemed like a distant memory. We spent the afternoon exploring the town, but as evening approached, my wife suggested we visit the beach. She had always loved the ocean at night, the way the moonlight danced on the water and the soothing sound of the waves. The beach at night was a completely different place. The crowds had long since dispersed, leaving the vast expanse of sand and sea to us. The moon was high in the sky, casting a silvery light over everything. The ocean, which had sparkled under the sun, now looked dark and endless, the waves crashing with a deep, rhythmic roar. It should have been peaceful, but there was an undeniable sense of isolation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We spread out the blanket and sat down, the cool sand shifting beneath us. The sound of the waves was almost hypnotic, but there was something else, a subtle, almost imperceptible noise beneath the crash of the water. It was faint, like the murmuring voices we'd heard in the hotel, but more distinct, as if they were coming from the ocean itself. As we sat there, the feeling of unease grew. The vastness of the dark ocean felt overwhelming, and I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being watched. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself that it was just the eerie beauty of the place playing tricks on my mind. But when I looked at my wife, I could see she felt it too. She was usually so at peace by the water, but now she was tense, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The beach, once a place of calm, now felt sinister. The ocean, which had always seemed so inviting, now looked like it could swallow us whole. We stayed only a little while longer, the oppressive feeling growing stronger with each passing minute. Eventually, we both agreed it was time to go. As we walked back to the hotel, the beach at our backs, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone emerging from the shadows. The strange noises in our room that night were louder than before. The voices seemed closer, almost as if they were right outside our door. I barely slept, my mind replaying the sensations from the beach, the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. The next morning, we decided to explore the area by car, hoping to put some distance between us and the uneasy feelings that had haunted us since our arrival. As we were leaving the hotel, the resort manager, an older man with a serious demeanor, approached us. "If you're planning to drive, I'd recommend staying on the main roads," he advised, his voice laced with concern. "The woods around here aren't safe, especially after dark. People have gotten lost, and worse." His words hung in the air, adding to the growing sense of dread that neither of us could shake. But despite his warning, we felt a strange pull to venture into the woods. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe we just wanted to confront the unease that had been building since we arrived. We set out in the late afternoon, driving down a narrow road that led deeper into the forest. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the road. As we drove further, the trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out what little light remained. The road, once a simple dirt path, now felt like a tunnel, leading us deeper into the unknown. Night fell quickly in the woods, the darkness swallowing us whole. The headlights of the car barely pierced the thick blackness, revealing only fleeting glimpses of twisted branches and dense underbrush. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the crunch of gravel under the tires and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. My wife, who had been excited about the drive, grew quiet as the oppressive darkness settled around us. She finally suggested we turn back, but as I searched for a place to turn the car around, something caught our attention. It happened suddenly, a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by our headlights. My heart leapt into my throat as I slammed on the brakes. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, with a hood pulled low over its face, obscuring any features. It was motionless, just standing there, watching us, or so it seemed. The air in the car grew thick with fear. My wife gripped my arm, her voice trembling as she urged me to back up. Panic surged through me as I threw the car into reverse, desperate to put distance between us and that figure. The car lurched backward, the tires skidding on the loose gravel as I struggled to keep control. We didn't stop until we were back on the main road, the trees thinning out and the oppressive darkness giving way to the open sky. My wife was shaking, her face pale in the dim light of the dashboard. I was no better, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. We drove back to the resort in silence, neither of us daring to speak, afraid that acknowledging what had happened would make it real. The noises in the room that night were worse than before. The murmuring voices seemed closer, almost as if they were inside the room with us. I lay awake, my mind replaying the sight of that shadowy figure over and over again. Who or what had we seen out there? The next morning, we packed our bags and checked out, cutting our vacation short. The beach, the resort, none of it mattered anymore. We just wanted to get away, to escape whatever was lurking in those woods. The resort manager didn't ask why we were leaving early, but his eyes followed us with a look that suggested he knew exactly what had happened. As we drove away, the events of the previous night haunted me. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure standing on the road behind us, but there was nothing. Just the empty road and the endless stretch of forest, now bathed in daylight that did nothing to erase the memory of that night. Months later, I heard about the disappearances of tourists who had gone missing in those very woods, their cars found abandoned on the road, but no trace of them anywhere. Locals whispered about a man, a shadowy figure that had been seen by others before they vanished. We were lucky to get out, but the memory of that night lingers. I always considered myself a bit of a loner, someone who found comfort in solitude. My life in the city had become a blur of early mornings, late nights, and the relentless grind of work. The noise, the crowds, and the constant pressure were suffocating me. So when I finally decided to take a vacation, it was out of sheer desperation. I needed to escape, to find a place where I could be alone with my thoughts, where the world's chaos couldn't reach me. I booked a stay at a small, seaside town, far enough from the city to feel like a different world, but close enough that I could drive there in a few hours. The town was known for its quiet charm, a place where time seemed to slow down. The idea of spending a week by the ocean, with nothing but the sound of the waves to keep me company, was exactly what I needed. When I arrived, the town was as picturesque as I'd imagined. The streets were lined with quaint, old-fashioned shops, and the locals greeted me with friendly smiles. My rental was a modest, one-bedroom apartment overlooking the beach. It wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable, and the view of the ocean from the balcony was breathtaking. It began on the fourth day. I woke up feeling uneasy, a sense of dread hanging over me that I couldn't quite explain. I chalked it up to a bad dream, though I couldn't remember having one. The feeling persisted throughout the day, a nagging discomfort that I couldn't shake. It was as if the air around me had changed, growing thicker, more oppressive. The cheerful, peaceful atmosphere of the town now felt stifling, and I found myself restless, unable to enjoy the simple pleasures that had brought me so much comfort just a day before. That evening, I went out for a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The town was quiet, almost eerily so. The streets that had once felt inviting now seemed too empty, too still. The lights in the windows of the houses were dim, and the few people I saw seemed distant, their faces expressionless. It was as if the entire town had slipped into some kind of strange, unspoken melancholy. I returned to my apartment, hoping that a good night's sleep would make everything right again. But sleep didn't come easy. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. Every creak of the old building, every whisper of the wind outside felt amplified, setting my nerves on edge. When I finally did fall asleep, it was restless, filled with vague, unsettling dreams that left me feeling even more drained when I awoke. The next morning, I decided to visit one of the local cafes, hoping a change of scenery might help. The cafe was nearly empty, save for an elderly couple sitting in the corner. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, staring out at the ocean. The waves, which had once been so soothing, now seemed menacing, as if they were hiding something beneath their surface. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed something odd. The barista, a young woman with a friendly smile, was watching me. Every time I glanced in her direction, I caught her staring, her expression unreadable. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, but the unease in my gut only grew stronger. It felt as though everyone in the town was watching me, silently observing, waiting for something. I decided to leave the cafe and head back to my apartment. As I walked through the town, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see someone there, but there was never anyone. The streets were deserted, the silence almost deafening. Back in the apartment, I tried to distract myself with a book, but I couldn't focus. The words on the page seemed to blur together, and I found myself rereading the same paragraph over and over again. I was growing increasingly paranoid, jumping at every little noise, convinced that something was wrong. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was faint at first, just a soft scraping noise, like something being dragged across the floor. I sat up, straining to hear, and the sound grew louder, closer. It was coming from outside the apartment. I got out of bed and cautiously approached the door. My heart was pounding in my chest as I peered through the peephole, but I saw nothing. The hallway was empty. The sound had stopped. I waited, my breath held, but everything was still. After what felt like an eternity, I convinced myself that it had been my imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion. But when I turned back toward the bed, I froze. The door to the balcony was open. I was certain I had locked it before going to bed, but now it stood ajar, the curtains billowing gently in the breeze. I slowly approached it, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. I had to know. When I stepped onto the balcony, the night air was cold, biting against my skin. The beach below was deserted, the waves crashing against the shore with a relentless force. I looked around, but there was no one there. No sign that anyone had been in the apartment. I closed the door, locking it firmly, and returned to bed, but sleep was out of the question. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every noise amplified in the silence. The next day, I decided to cut my vacation short. Whatever peace I had hoped to find here was gone, replaced by a growing sense of dread that I couldn't escape. I packed my bags and checked out of the apartment, but as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The town seemed to be closing in on me, the buildings leaning in as if to trap me there forever. Even as I reached the highway, the feeling didn't fade. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me, but the road behind me was empty. The further I got from the town, the lighter the air seemed to become, the sense of oppression lifting slightly. But as I drove, a new fear began to take hold. The scenery outside the car window started to blur, the trees and signs blending into one another in a way that didn't make sense. I tried to focus on the road, but it felt like I was driving in circles, the same landmarks appearing over and over again. Panic set in as I realized I didn't recognize the road anymore. It was as if I had driven into a place that didn't exist, a loop I couldn't escape. The sun was setting, and with it, the darkness seemed to close in around me. Suddenly, my car started to sputter, the fuel gauge dipping to empty, that I realized I was truly lost. When the car finally died, I was left stranded in the middle of nowhere. I sat in the suffocating darkness for what felt like hours, my mind racing with dread. Just as I was about to give up, the car's engine sputtered to life, offering a glimmer of hope. Exhausted and terrified, I pushed forward. I spotted a weathered sign with the word highway. It was barely legible, but it was a lifeline. Without a second thought, I aimed the car towards it, clinging to the faint hope that this nightmare might finally have an end. I've always been careful with money, so when my company scheduled a business trip with a few days of vacation afterward, I decided to make the most of it on a budget. The meeting was a success, and I was eager to explore the charming town where we were staying. The cobblestone streets, lined with antique shops and cozy cafes, invited me to relax and unwind. After the meeting, I spent the afternoon wandering through the town's historic district. The streets were alive with the sights and sounds of local culture boutiques selling handmade crafts, the scent of fresh pastries wafting from a bakery, and the soft notes of a street musician playing nearby. I lost track of time as I browsed through old books and admired intricate jewelry. The sun warmed my skin, and a gentle breeze carried the fragrance of blooming flowers from a nearby park. It was a perfect afternoon. As evening fell, I treated myself to dinner at a small, family-owned restaurant by the harbor. The food was delicious fresh seafood, perfectly paired with a crisp white wine, and followed by a rich, velvety dessert. I watched the sunset over the water, the sky ablaze with hues of pink and orange, reflecting off the gentle waves. The peaceful atmosphere was a balm for my busy mind. After dinner, I took a leisurely stroll along the waterfront. The town was serene at night, the only sounds being the soft lapping of the waves and distant laughter from a group of friends. I found a bench and sat for a while, soaking in the tranquility. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow over the water, and I felt a deep sense of contentment. Feeling pleasantly tired, I made my way back to my hotel, an old place on Willow Street that I had chosen for its affordability and character. The hotel stood tall and isolated, its once grand exterior now worn and faded. As I stepped into the lobby, I was struck by the eerie silence. The receptionist, an elderly man with a vacant stare, handed me the key to my room without a word. My room was on the 3rd floor. As I ascended the creaky stairs, I noticed the dim lighting and the overwhelming scent of mildew. The room itself was small and sparsely furnished: a single bed, a wooden dresser, and a cracked mirror hanging above it. I unpacked and tried to shake off the uneasiness. As the night wore on, the sense of discomfort only grew. The room was freezing, despite my attempts to adjust the broken radiator. The walls were thin, and I could hear every creak and groan of the building, each one making me jump. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt as if I were being watched. I turned off the lights, hoping the darkness would help, but it only made things worse. The darkness was suffocating, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in the silence. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. The sound stopped suddenly, leaving me in an eerie silence. I felt a chill run down my spine as the air grew colder. My breath came out in small, visible puffs, and I could feel the temperature drop even further. I reached for the lamp, but my hand froze when I heard a faint whisper. It was so soft I almost missed it, but it was their words I couldn't understand, spoken in a voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Panic welled up inside me. I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my coat and suitcase and bolted for the door. The hallway was dark, the lights flickering as I ran towards the stairs. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more frantic with every step. By the time I reached the lobby, I was in a full-blown panic. The receptionist was gone, the desk abandoned. I didn't stop to look around, I just ran out the front door and into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away, gasping for breath. The old hotel loomed in the distance, its windows dark and lifeless. Even now, I can still hear those whispers in my mind, haunting me. I never went back to that hotel. The next day, I found another place to stay, but the experience stayed with me, a lingering dread I couldn't shake.